Hi, I'm Manny Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington Realtors legal hotline lawyer. And this special video series is coming to you from beautiful Tri-Cities. Thank you to the Tri-Cities Association of Realtors hosting the Washington Realtors Fall Business Conference. And joining me for this video discussion is Ken Sachs.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Ken Sachs is broker extraordinaire from Spokane, not only designated broker, but also an instructor.
Yes.
And Ken and I decided that we would get together today and talk quite a bit, in fact, about Forms 35 and Form 35R.
Correct. You bet.
And this video series I can see taking 2 or 3, at least, videos, because I'm hoping that we have an in-depth enough conversation with respect to Form 35 and Form 35R.
Yep.
That brokers who are brand new and have never used the forms learn how to use Forms 35 and Form 35R. And maybe even more importantly, brokers who know everything there is to know about.
I was going to say, not just new brokers, but we want all brokers to get something from this. And I think you will.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So let's take it from the top.
Okay.
Okay. So Form 35 is a financing...
Inspection.
Inspection. Thank you. Form 35 is an inspection addendum, right?
Yes, it's an addendum.
It's not the Form 35 itself is not an inspection contingency. It's an inspection addendum.
Right.
And the reason I'm calling that out is because brokers actually have to mark a box to take advantage of the contingency itself. Is that right?
Yes, you have to, like I say, fill in blanks, mark boxes. We don't want to skip these things.
What if none of the boxes on Form 35 are marked, but the form is part of the purchase and sale agreement initialed at the bottom by all the parties?
So we have an initialed form with nothing answered, so we don't know, what do you want? I mean, I talk about eliminating confusion when we draft a contract. This is the exact opposite. This is creating confusion. Do you guys want it? Do you not? What do you want to do? I don't know.
That's right. And if somebody were to ask me how would a court interpret that, my answer would be I have absolutely no idea, because there's a huge ambiguity.
And being held to the standard and care of an attorney, would a lawyer do that?
I'd like to think not,
Yeah.
but then again, I'd like to think brokers don't.
Sure.
So from this point forward, no broker shall, right?
Correct.
Make sure that when you include a Form 35 in the purchase and sale agreement in the buyer's offer, that you mark the box that the buyer is intending for you to mark. And for the purpose of this discussion, at least right now, let's focus on the first box.
Yes.
Okay. So buyer's going to mark the box, number 1, checkbox, paragraph number 1, to trigger the inspection contingency.
Yes, we want to do an inspection.
Okay. We're going to spend a lot of time today talking about what the buyer is going to do. Before we do that, I'd like to jump to what a listing broker should do when the listing broker receives an offer with a Form 35 inspection contingency marked as part of the buyer's offer. What do you say to a seller upon receipt of that?
Well, see, with a seller, you want them to understand it's not a done deal, because sellers, they get a contract signed on their house, start packing. No, don't start packing. Here's the ability the buyer has. First, you explain the inspection, what's going to happen, and do it again when you have the, just before the inspection occurs. But more importantly, and I will go over the 35R with the seller and show them, here are the responses we can expect. One of them being that the buyer can terminate and be done and not be in default.
Right.
So don't start packing.
I often explain it as the get out of jail free card idea. Buyer can terminate for any reason or no reason at all. Buyer may do an inspection, buyer may not do an inspection. It may be 10 days from mutual acceptance, and the first thing that we get from the buyer may be a notice of termination. You may never even have an inspection done of the property. And that's going to be infuriating for the seller, because that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
But in fact, that's what the Form 35 inspection contingency allows. So just make sure your seller's not surprised when the transaction is terminated by a buyer who may or may not perform an inspection, who may or may not give the seller any reason for the termination. The transaction simply terminates, and the seller, we don't want the seller to be surprised at that point.
That's right. We have to always be explaining, always be educating. That's just part of it.
So you said something else that I think is interesting. You explained to the seller what to expect from the inspection. Tell me about that.
Well, so this is a learned behavior that I used to not explain to a seller what happened. And then years and years and years ago, I got a call from a very angry seller. The inspection had just occurred. And what had happened was he could tell people had been in the house, light switches had to be turned on again, and things like that, things that go on in an inspection. He was so upset. And I'm thinking, these aren't really significant things. But then thinking about it, all the emotions that a seller's going through in selling, everything's a big deal.
Right.
And it's my fault, it was my fault for not explaining it. So moving forward, learning from that experience now, I never assume that you or anyone else knows what's going to occur. So now I always explain to a seller, here's what's going to happen. They're going to come into your house, you're going to know somebody's been here. They're going to run the shower, the dishwasher, and they're going to kick the tires.
And go under the house.
And go under the house.
And go maybe up in the crawl space.
This is their right. This is what we said they could do. So I always explain that now, and that came from getting yelled at a long time ago for not explaining it.
Okay. All right. Let's move to the buyers.
Buyers.
Okay. So buyer, we have mutual acceptance. Buyer has an inspection contingency. Let's talk about how the Form 35 is broken down with an initial inspection period and an additional inspection period. And then we also need to talk about the negotiation periods. But let's focus at first on that initial inspection period.
Okay.
By default, it's 10 days, right?
Correct.
And we're going to talk later about whether or not brokers should be adjusting those default time periods, because I really think in today's world, sometimes those need to be adjusted.
I do.
Okay, good. But let's talk first of all about what can happen during that initial inspection period. During the initial inspection period, buyer is required to conform to the home inspector statute in bringing inspectors into seller's home, right? What does that mean to you?
That means to me a few things. That means to me it can't be performed by buyer's dad who built a house 35 years ago and knows everything. Because the form says it, buyer or a licensed home inspector.
So not buyer's dad, but buyer personally could do it.
Buyer, yes, buyer, not buyer's dad or buyer's great uncle. Buyer.
So here's a question I get a lot. Okay, buyer, wink, wink, nod, nod, is going to do it, but their dad's going to be with them. Is that okay?
To have the dad with the buyer. Well,
and because we all know,
what's going to happen?
Wink, nod, nod, that dad's doing it and buyer says they're going to do it. And I'm not sure what your answer is going to be to this, so I'm going to tell you what the Department of Licensing says about this.
Okay.
If a broker uses their MLS key and opens the door for buyer's dad to perform the inspection, I don't care if it's a wink, wink, nod, nod because buyer's there or not, if what everybody knows is going on is that an unlicensed home inspector is inspecting the property, which buyer's dad would be, then broker has participated in the aiding and abetting of the unauthorized practice of home inspections.
How would you defend that? Well, no, the dad didn't do that. How would you defend that?
You wouldn't
no way.
unless you're going to lie.
Yeah, but there's
realtors
no way.
don't lie. So, yeah.
There's just no way to defend that.
So the lesson being,
don't do it.
Don't do it. It's buyer personally can do the inspection, or else you conform to the home inspector statute. And you're exactly right that the home inspector statute means that a whole home inspection is conducted by a licensed home inspector.
I'm with you.
Anybody else allowed to be in the house during that initial 10-day period based on the home inspector statute?
The home inspector, the buyer, the broker who popped the box.
And during that time, in conformity with the home inspector statute, if the buyer wanted to, the buyer can have an electrician, a licensed electrician.
For some of the other systems.
Right.
During that first 10-day period.
Exactly. So the home inspector licensed allows buyer to bring the licensed home inspector to do the whole home inspection, and in addition, an electrician, a licensed electrician to inspect the electrical system, a licensed plumber to inspect the plumbing system, an engineer to inspect the structural integrity, etc. There are a few exceptions, but they all fall into that licensed category. But what's notable, the missing component is what's notable. Who's not allowed to perform any inspections based on the home inspector statute is a contractor. right? They're the one category of professional, even a licensed contractor, who does not fall within an exception to the home inspector statute. So during that initial inspection period, no buyer can bring a contractor into seller's home without first getting seller's permission.
And I don't know if you're going to bring this up, but the other thing that I talk about a lot when I teach this class is when you're selecting that inspector, I don't like the licensee to dictate who the inspector is going to be. I don't like the licensee to pay for it. I don't like the licensee to pay part of it, because I've seen collusion cases down the road, and they've pointed to that as the argument for there must be collusion, because the licensee paid for the inspection, the licensee ordered the inspection, and something went wrong where they found out something later. Oh, well, didn't the inspector find that out? Oh, no. So I've seen that a handful of times.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so no buyer knows inspectors. How do you handle the fact that a buyer doesn't know who they should hire as an inspector?
So we have a Form 41D. If you're going to be referring inspectors, you simply put on the 41D the names of the inspectors, nature of relationship, have referred in the past, and then I would provide the buyer with that.
Okay, but so how is that not collusion? Are you giving more than one inspector's name?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully at least 3, right?
Yes.
Right? And then what kind of instruction do you give the buyer with respect to how you how do you make sure that it's the buyer's choice as to the inspector they're going to hire?
I tell them it's their choice.
Okay, and they need to call the
Yes.
inspectors and interview themselves and decide who they're going to have?
Whatever they want to do, whatever they feel is appropriate, they do it. I
Okay.
don't do it.
Okay. Will you schedule for them when they say, I want to use John Smith for my inspection? Will you then pick up the phone and schedule for them if need be so that you can coordinate your schedule with theirs?
I don't do that. I have them schedule it, and if there's a window that it has to fit into, then they'll know what that window is, but I don't schedule it.
Okay. So I'm going to just say, as a hotline lawyer, I don't have a problem with a broker scheduling it. I agree with you that buyers should be required to select the inspector. They need to call, they need to interview, they need to figure out who they want to use for the inspection. But since the broker has to typically meet them there with an MLS key and open the door and then stay with the inspector during the inspection to safeguard seller's property, I have no problem with the broker calling the inspector selected by the buyer and scheduling that appointment.
See, and we're spoiled. A lot of our inspectors have keys.
That's unique to Spokane. Most areas don't have that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. So we have not gotten very far through the form yet.
No.
We've just gotten started with the inspection, but this video has probably gone on long enough that it makes sense to stop right here.
Sure.
And pick up the next video talking about what happens as soon as the inspection as soon as the inspection has been completed.
Okay.
So that's where we'll start for next Friday.
Sounds good.
All right. If you have questions on what we've talked about so far or anything else, send an email to me, legalhotline@warealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington Realtors member.